Welcome to another episode of Seat at the Table. David, Andrea, so happy to have you guys here today. You guys are aware this particular, not just episode, but the reason why we do Seat at the Table is to give an opportunity for folks like you guys to come and just talk about issues that are pertinent in the African American community. One of the areas and one of the topics that we're going to address today, or at least try to dive into, is this concept of like allyship, right? And allyship specifically in the African American community. So I brought both of you guys here because, look, I trust you guys, I love you guys, and I think you guys can be honest. And these are one of those situations where, it's going to require some level of vulnerability, but at the same time, it's, I think, a conversation that we need to have, and not just have when, someone's killed by a cop, or not have when there's buzz, but we need to keep pushing this conversation. So let's start with this baseline of how, and I want to hear from both of y'all on this. How do we define, like, what does allyship mean? Like, how do we define that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think before you even like understand allyship, I think the most important thing when I look at it is recognizing that there is racism everywhere, in every aspect of life, and understanding that I think is extremely important, and then recognizing within oneself that might benefit from privilege, and if I don't see that, then you can pretend that racism doesn't even exist because I'm not seeing it. And like growing up through life, I felt like you can't just like, oh, if it doesn't happen to me, then it doesn't exist. Of course. Just a real quick story. Like I have a 10-year-old son, and he's learning about racism now. And he asked me like the question, like, why am I learning about this? Why I don't see this. Like, why are the people mean to black people? And my first like gut reaction is like, well, maybe he shouldn't know about this because he's pure, if that's even a thing. But then I was like, no, that's my privilege talking. He doesn't know about it because he doesn't face it. Wow. And he should know about it. He should understand it because it might be happening to people he comes across, his friends, and people that he goes to school with. So I think that's important place to start in terms of allyship.
Agreed. What do you think in terms of you define it?
Yeah, I mean, I think even building on from what you've said, so once you come to a place where you kind of recognize what your privilege is and the power that you have because of that privilege, then as an ally, it's about being active and actually doing something about it. Yeah. People can sometimes say I'm an ally, but I think we have a responsibility to continue to ask ourselves, am I being passive? Yeah. What am I actively doing, in that space?
See, like when I think allyship, I think someone who could defend me, right? So like, for instance, America and Israel are allies. If anybody attacks Israel, America will go and defend. So when I think ally or partner is someone who can go and defend, and here's the key thing, to defend especially when nobody's looking, right? Like, how can you stand, because that's the hard part, right? It's easy when there's a lot of buzz and it's something that's like extremely just like outrageous and racist. But what happens when it's, you're in the cafeteria at work and there's a quiet conversation, or it's a Thanksgiving table and you hear somebody say something, right? So let's talk. I mean, and I appreciate the definition of allyship, but specifically, if y'all can just give me some tactics, like to the black community, because I can tell you right now, like it's as an African American, right? The burden is heavy. When we look at all the stuff like George Floyd, and it's not Floyd, that wasn't the first. I mean, you can go back, to the beginning of time, and again, feeling alone. But whenever we made good change, it was never us by ourselves.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I guess, what is allyship in 2021, or in the future? What does allyship for the African American community look like? And especially imagine just talking to a Caucasian who's watching this episode, who wants to be an ally, but they don't know what it looks like. Yeah. If you can kind of give some ideas to that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I can start with this one. I think there are a lot of different ways that one can actively be an ally. So I feel like sometimes people first will go to, oh, I need to give money to someplace that supports, and that's fine, but there's a lot of other avenues. So if I look at my own position, as a leader in corporate America, how can you be an ally? Are you getting involved in D&I initiatives? Are you looking around and sharing diversity within your teams? Are you creating space for difficult conversations?
Yeah.
Of course, your vote is another way that you can be an ally.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, I think it starts, those are great. I think it all starts with like listening to what's going on in the community. You getting educated, following, maybe people on social media.
Yeah.
Simple stuff as like maybe liking and commenting and retweeting, so then more people in your world are seeing it, that other maybe people like-minded like me, but they're also seeing now views and themes of people in the community. I think probably the biggest thing that you can do is speaking up when you hear any signs of racism. If silent equals oppression. Yeah. And I think that if you don't say anything, you're implicit to it. So speaking out even to a close friend, like, hey man, that's not, why did you say that? And then maybe you can start a conversation, which I guess would be the best outcome. Correct. Of anything. So
I want to just dig into that a little bit, because you bring it, like, I think in my opinion, you're hitting, I don't want to say a sore spot, but it's definitely, we talk about speaking out or like making a difference. There's this thing, at least in my opinion, where it's like, I'm not racist, right? So I don't have, like, as long as I'm not racist, I'm good. I don't have to be a part of it, like, you know what I mean? I don't have to talk about it. How dangerous is that mindset, right? Where I can abstract myself and not be a part of the struggle, because at the end of the day, right, I'm not racist, right? And if you want to find the racist folks, I guess how do we deal with that particular balance? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right. It's the difference between not being racist, but actually if you're not anti-racist, right, then you really are. And so some of that, going to what you said earlier, I think actually goes back to really understanding your privilege, and that the way to get past that is to kind of fill your mind, fill your thoughts with understanding how you're behaving as a result of things that are maybe more deeply ingrained versus in your day-to-day.
Yeah.
But you got to take a look at also like what is the goal? The end goal here is probably to invoke change. Yeah. And if you're saying things like I'm not racist, that doesn't move anything forward. That doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anyone else's perspective. It doesn't even change your own perspective. Correct. Because that's just you're emphasizing that you have privilege. Correct. Which is the exact opposite of allyship, I think.
But you talked about, even in addition to that, this idea of learning, though, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is some conversation now at a federal level about critical race theory, or actually spending time learning about, because like as good as America is, we have a checkered past, right? Like, and I remember even one time, I don't know if it was President Obama or maybe President Clinton, maybe it was Obama, when he talked internationally about our past, and they say, hey, he's weak, he's anti-American, right? How much, like, is it important for all of us to learn the history? Because I can tell you right now, I know growing up for me, the highlight was the heroism of George Washington, Abe Lincoln, so we always focused on kind of the best part of it. Not that those are good things, but we spent minimal, if no time, on some of the areas that we didn't do well in, right? Yeah. When we look at Native Americans, they told me about Thanksgiving, that's how it was created, right? And the Pilgrims, but no one ever talked about the slaughter, right? The chicken pox and all the different type of disease that they came and killed. So where does I guess where I'm trying to get to is how important it is from, as you guys who I respect as allies, from rethinking how we even educate the next generation. Like, how important is that?
I mean, that's a great question, and one that I think America's been trying to solve for, probably well over a few generations, in 50, 100 years, and to answer it quickly, I think is difficult. I don't know if America is quite ready to invoke like a critical race theory across all counties across America. We're a very divided country, as everyone knows, but it absolutely needs to be discussed and talked about. Yeah. Maybe not label it something that's such, or maybe it does need labeling. But I think promoting diversity in our schools, diversity in our workforce. It's happening, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think companies need to have it part of their culture.
Yeah, of course.
And I think and that's starting to happen. We're starting to see more and more of it, and I think that's a great track to go. And then within the schools, I do believe that it has to be talked about. I know in the past, like whenever we're growing up, we always learned about Martin Luther King Jr. and others, and it kind of stops there.
Yeah.
And it's just like maybe 1 or 2 times a year.
Yep.
So that's too little.
Yeah. I agree.
There has to be more, and throughout the thing. But when you start putting labels on stuff, it causes friction. That's a very complicated thing to talk about.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that is important about education, even if we're not talking about sort of like at, a federal level or a state level, honing in on the point you said about how you're feeling a burden.
Yeah.
I think it's our obligation as well to educate ourselves. And
Yes.
I think sometimes people don't understand what that means. So you hear something on the news and then you think, oh, I want to call my Black friend and figure out what I can do. And it's like, no. You need to go look at the New York Times bestseller list. You need to go to Google, and then you need to call your friend and say, how are you feeling?
Correct.
And I think that that's kind of a really important mindset shift, even for people that want to do well, to realize we have to take it upon ourselves.
Correct. Because we can't have empathy without understanding. Like, look, the 4th of July has a different meaning for me than it would mean for the average American, right? We weren't free on July 4th. So we could look at when we beat or defeated the British, but they told African Americans, yeah, but you don't count. Like, we fought, but you don't count. So when we look at Juneteenth, it's a thing for us. And the same thing I mentioned about Native Americans, right? I'm cognizant thinking about what does Thanksgiving feel for them, right? But I get it, it's a good feeling, and here's the biggest one, the biggest culprit. In October in 1492, I learned about Christopher Columbus, this hero who came to America and discovered it, right? But that's not necessarily the truth. So now, I'm looking at my daughters and my kids, and I'm having to educate them. Actually, Christopher Columbus actually never came to the United States of America. He was in the Caribbeans, but he's getting a lot of credit, right? There were other people who were here first about it. So I think, to your point, we do have to spend a little bit of time educating and learning more about the struggle. But on the flip side, and this is a good segue, while we want allies, we want to build a stronger coalition, I think we have to make sure we're creating a space, and we're actually, I don't want to use the word recruiting, but we're making it easier for more allies to become.
Right. Because
it is a sensitive topic, right? And sometimes people are just scared to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. So I guess from your point of view, I would love to hear both you guys, your journey on becoming an ally. Were there moments where it was I didn't know how to respond, or you were scared of saying the wrong thing, or maybe you said the wrong thing, and you had to apologize and kind of backtrack. But if you could just kind of share with me, what was your journey as an ally? I'll love it. I'll start with you.
Okay. Actually, I'll share a story. So I think it was a few years ago when the world was still properly open, and I was at a corporate holiday party, and then after we all went for drinks after to an open bar, and I was with 4 of my friends, all from East Africa, and it was over, we walked out, there was a white security guard at the door, and a couple of minutes later, a guy came barreling out of the bar, like a short white man, and he knocked me completely over and then was about to fall. And one of my friends came over, helped me up, and put his hand on this guy's shoulder and said, hey, completely out of nowhere, the security guard came over and pepper sprayed him.
Oh, man.
And I was hit with the residual. Yeah. So I couldn't see, he couldn't see. And we got home, and we were cleaning up, back at the hotel. And I was really shook, and I looked at my friend and I said, well, are you all right? Are you okay? He's like, oh yeah, that isn't the first time that has happened to me. Yeah. And I was so hurt for him and for them that was the story. I had lived it. You can read about it and you can have empathy, but experiencing it, that really played a role for me in terms of thinking about how I can be active. And that these things are real, and you read about it, but when you experience it firsthand, you kind of really, it hits you hard.
Yeah.
And then I think, given day to day in my job, then I started to feel like I had a responsibility to speak out, and then to also say like, hey, I know that I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to keep trying. And if I say something that is uncomfortable, you know, taking responsibility for that. But I think that was a really critical turning moment for me in being an ally.
That's a good story. That's a good story. I don't know, Woody, what do you think?
Like I said earlier, like in terms of allyship, it's always ongoing. You're always growing and evolving. And like the words of like Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, is you'll have a growth mindset, learning different perspectives. I mean, there's a number of stories that I've had that kind of helps me like see the privilege that I have with, you know, a black friend of mine. And that really is like a check, because I'm seeing it from their lens. And I need to have more of those constantly, because there's so many things where I might take for granted, but my friend might not. And like one story is like so stupid, but we went to like a basketball game. We had extra tickets, and I said, I'll just sell it to someone, and my friend's like, no, you can't do that, you get arrested. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I can do it. And so he was so nervous, like he removed himself from the situation, and then I ended up selling it. Unfortunately, the guy gave me a fake counterfeit bill in return, and then I told my friend, I go, I think this is fake. I go, it's no big deal. In my head, it's like, it's no big deal, I'll just go to the bank and exchange it. And that's like the definition of privilege. That's like terrible for me to think that way, but that's just because I've never had like consequences. And now, like ever since like that and other examples, I don't think like that. I think of like in a different lens, like the whole kind of spectrum. If I can, I try to my best I can, like not just like this, but from everyone's different point of view. And getting examples of that is like, I think, helps.
That's interesting too, right? Because a lot of things we don't always get deep enough into the conversation. If you think about privilege, right? We talk about race, but then when you layer in socioeconomic class, where you are in the gender spectrum, where you are in like my experience as a white woman is different than yours as a white male, is different as yours, and that plays a role too in how you have to move in every space, right?
Of course. Yeah, like look, I've had people come to me from an ally perspective, and now one thing I loved is when they said, look, Joseph, I don't know, but I really want to learn, like, tell me. Because I think the worst you could do too in an attempt to be an ally, because I've seen the opposite side where people are going to tell you how to help, or they tell you this is what we're going to do. It misses the mark. You know what I mean?
You have to, like you said, you have to listen. I can't be your voice.
Correct.
And I think that's extremely important, is to listen. I should be able to ask, do you want to talk about it?
Correct.
Versus, like this is like my opinion. Like my opinion in this situation is not relevant.
Correct.
It's understanding what you're going through and having you tell me and express your thoughts, and then me learning and sharing that.
But I do think, David, being proactive though.
Right.
Because even like I look, someone who worked in corporate, especially in technology, where African American representation is extremely low. Whenever we have these things that affect or shake the nation, the first thing I look to is, well, how do my leaders respond?
Right.
And I've been in scenarios where leaders were extremely quiet, and that hurt me. I've been in scenarios where leaders were extremely active, and I was excited about that. So I guess, you know, and it brings me to a good point, and I would love to kind of hear from both of you guys on this. If you could just take it back to I'm gonna use George Floyd because that was something that we all can remember. What was that like for you? Like, what was, when it happened, when you saw that video, do you remember or do you recall, like, what was, because I think it would be good, especially for African Americans watching this, to understand, because I know for us, there was a lot of anger, right? It was a lot of hurt. I would love to kind of hear from both of you guys on what was the feeling like when that situation happened.
I mean, for one, it's disproportionate, so that's a problem in itself, right there. And for me, like, keep on seeing this. It hurts me that you're feeling pain, and my friends are feeling pain, and my associates are feeling pain. I see it, I can feel it. It's not like a place of ignoring it. Also, I think that we shouldn't just say, "Hey, Joe, sorry, what happened? Like, that sucks. I'm sorry." We should change this conversation. Is like, do you want to talk about it? And and kind of hearing how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And then and sharing that and getting that versus like just like an empathetic like sorry man.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I think, building on that too, a lot of things that I reflected on when, this was in the news and people talk about having empathy, and I was really sitting with that and thinking about, well, could I can't actually know in this life, in this body, I can't be empathetic and feel those feelings. And so then like, how do you move up the spectrum to compassion? I think a really important thing that I felt and kind of learned in that time is to be able to say, I'm never going to know what you're feeling, but I know that this is wrong and I want to help. And to your point about anger, right? Like if I go down a spiritual rabbit hole for a second, underlying anger is typically grief and sadness. So then from my place of privilege, then I start thinking about, well, instead of moving from guilt or shame, how can I move from compassion and love? Because I don't get a right to the anger that you feel. So let me move from a space of love, and then, my words and how I'm creating a space for the people around me can hopefully be further reaching, as a result of that.
That's so powerful, man. That was powerful because that particular, for me, there's always been a lot of these things, but there are moments where I can remember like that broke me. And I think, especially me, I've done a decent job in my life kind of compartmentalizing. When I'm here, I got to put this face on. When I'm in corporate, I got to look like most of my corporate friends. When I'm in my community, I got to look like my community. That has erased. I'm bringing my true self everywhere I go. And I think Floyd was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I was like, look, this has to be part of the conversation. Especially these companies who promote big D&I initiatives, they promote, no longer is chatter talk. Like I need to see movement. It's our responsibility. And it's business responsibility, it's community responsibilities. So I appreciate that. Look, I could talk about this all day. I do want to wrap this up. There are a lot of African-American folks who are watching this episode. And I think they would love to hear directly from you. So if you could just, in a couple words or sentences, in a spirit of allyship, if there was something you would like to communicate to the African-American community, and both of you guys, we can do this before we wrap this up, this would be a good time to kind of share. So Woody, we'll start with you.
One, we can do better. I think that's without saying, as a society, as people with white people that have privilege or even don't, I think we can do better. I think we need to have more conversation about it. I think if silence is, that's the wrong way to go, because that just bottle things in. It keeps the status quo. We need to have dialogue. This is great that you're doing this. Like, it really is. I really appreciate your own initiative, creating these conversations. This is not your job, day job, and that's powerful. And to get your voice out, having this out there and having us talk about it, I think it's fantastic. And get this out, get the voice out, share it. I will continue to share initiatives like this. I will continue to take part, follow leaders, thought leaders. I think more people need to do that.
Agreed.
I think it starts with that. It's just like learning and being informed and being educated, and then keep the dialogue. And it doesn't stop. You have to continually engage. Otherwise, it's just like only talk about it when something like George Floyd happens, which is, I think, the wrong way to go about it.
Correct. I agree.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think the most important thing is to know, as a community, that you're seen, you're loved. There are many of us from our place that understand that we have more work to do, and we'll continue to educate ourselves and do it even when nobody's watching.
Yeah. Well, let me just say to both of y'all, thank you. I'm fortunate to know both individuals, and they defend us and they empathize with our struggle. And so I'm very appreciative of the effort. I love the fact that you're teaching your kids about racism, right? As an African American, I didn't even learn about that stuff. The way we learned about it was experiencing it, right? And look, there's 40 million African Americans in the United States of America. and here's the funny thing, we don't always agree on a lot of things, but we all could agree to that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I appreciate you two for just coming to this platform and being vulnerable. Like, that stuff matters. So look, thank you guys for joining us at the episode of Seat at the Table. I appreciate y'all. It was really good having y'all.
Thank you, John.